Tighten your lines as we get ready to sail the seven seas on the Political Pirate Podcast. Join Captain Ted Yoho and the salty dog John Martin as they search far and wide for the greatest treasure of all, the truth. From local Florida news to nationwide stories and the globe beyond, we've got it all mapped out. Now here's your hosts, the salty dog John Martin and Captain Ted Yoho.
Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the 3 Ps, the Political Pirate Podcast, with yours truly, the host, John Martin, the old salty dog. And you may notice that we're absent our captain, so we're a bit rudderless, so I'll do the best I can. But our captain, Ted Yoho, is on assignment, and we'll probably be out both the show today and Friday. But we'll be back with bells on, and we'll tell you all he was doing next week. A reminder, ladies and gentlemen, that we have moved the show now. It is every day, not every day, on Mondays and Fridays, just like before, but the time now will be 12 noon. 12 noon, of course, you can watch it anytime you'd like on demand, wherever you are watching it currently right now. But make the call. Call Freddie. Of course, we're right here in the heart of Spurrier's Gridiron Grill, and my good friend Freddie Wiebe is also a partner here with the great coach Spurrier. But make that call. Call Freddie that you see on your screen right now. Become a part of the show. Become a sponsor of the show. Help us to educate, motivate, and activate people, because God knows we certainly need it. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we had some really sad news come across the wire yesterday, and that was that Lindsey Graham, the long-term senator from the great state of South Carolina, passed away unexpectedly, basically due to heart disease. The latest reports are that he had a tear in one of his aorta, but he had heart condition for quite some time. He was 71 years old, just recently celebrated a birthday. And of course, his father died when he was 65, I think. His father died of a heart attack, so he has it in his genetic code, so to speak, and struggled with it off and on most of his life. And we'll talk about Mr. Graham here in just a minute. But in general, what this does is adds to what is going to be a topsy-turvy Senate races coming up in the midterms in November, and some special primaries, and we'll talk about that. But as I say, huge news about Lindsey Graham. Prayers to his family and friends. Now, I want to say something I really wasn't planning on talking about today, but I was compelled to after I saw some posts on Facebook from people across the spectrum, and some of them I consider my friends, and I just don't understand the vitriol. And I'm going to be critical of Lindsey Graham here in just a minute. So I'm not opposed to criticism. Everybody is subject to that, and nobody is perfect. And Lord knows I have my issues with Lindsey Graham, and I will discuss them in a minute. But I'm appalled to see people go to such vitriol where they're literally saying things that are just beneath human dignity in my view. And I don't understand the purpose of that, especially literally on the eve of the person's death, because love them, hate them, whatever, there's always somebody who is mourning the death of someone. And Lindsey Graham, by all accounts, was an honest man in that sense. I don't think that he was a criminal and that type of thing. I didn't agree with him much politically, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But I do genuinely send out prayers to his family and friends. He just returned. He was a workaholic by all extent. Like I say, I don't always agree with some of his work, but he was a workaholic. He had just returned from the Ukraine after going over there and visiting with Zelensky, the president of the Ukraine. One of his last official functions was over there. And I didn't realize how grueling a trip it is now in the Ukraine, because not only is it obviously a long flight if you're leaving from the United States of America, but just to travel in the Ukraine, he went on a 10-hour train ride. And if you're someone who's got some health issues and all of that, and you do jet lag and then get on a 10-hour train ride, when he returned back, he told people, including President Trump, who was apparently one of the last people he spoke to by telephone, that he was not feeling well at all. But I met Lindsey Graham. Now, I wouldn't expect him to remember me from Adam, but I met Lindsey Graham at Trump's first inauguration. I was invited to go there by Blaise Ingoglia, who is now the CEO of the state of Florida, was a member of the Senate in Florida at that time and the chair of the Republican Party. He invited me, and it was kind of my honeymoon. My wife and I had gotten married on the 10th of January, and we celebrated our honeymoon, so to speak, at Trump's first inauguration in D.C. It was a spectacular event, but my wife and I were standing in a line. At the time, I was the state committee man for Alachua County in the Republican Party. And it varies from state to state how they do that. But basically, I represented Alachua County at the Republican Party level. And we were waiting in line to get into the Senate office building. If you've never been to D.C., there's a separate wing out not too far from the Capitol where the Senate office chambers are. And we were waiting in a line to get in there, and it was pretty much a line of people like myself who were, I guess you could say, somewhat dignitaries, depending on how you look at it. And Lindsey Graham came out and literally was working the line, going down and shaking people's hands and welcoming them. He was the only senator that I saw doing that. He was very gracious. As I say, I didn't agree with a lot of what he did at the time and still don't, but I did meet him. And as I say, he was very gracious to my wife. And, as I say, I was not a big fan. Let me tell you why I was not a big fan of Lindsey Graham. There's basically two reasons. One is that he never met a war he didn't want the United States to be involved in. And that was the way he's been that way long before Trump came on the scene, and certainly was literally that way until the day he died, that he wanted to project the United States of America, policeman of the world. That was kind of his philosophy. I understand where he's coming from with that, because to put it in his own words, he wanted to project the might of the United States of America worldwide. I'm not really opposed to that in some aspects, but I don't think that means we have to be involved with literally boots on the ground in every skirmish. If it were up to Mr. Lindsey Graham, we would literally have troops probably in Iran right now, and I'm not for that. And then the other thing, probably my biggest criticism of Lindsey Graham, is that he was a bit two-faced for my taste. And what I mean by that is, he would switch back and forth. He was always generally conservative, not to the same extent that I am, but he was generally conservative. But I'll give you a good example of what I'm talking about. When Donald Trump first came out running for president for his first term, Lindsey Graham was running for president, and he and John McCain were bosom buddies, joined at the hip. So he hated Trump at that time, was very anti-Trump, one of the first major political figures to just be totally anti-Trump. And he literally was right up until Trump got the nomination. Then he switched, so to speak, and tried to cozy up to President Trump and become bosom buddies of him, and was like one of his staunchest supporters of the president all the way through Trump's second election, when he was running for re-election, when Biden won, and Lindsey was up for re-election at that same time for Senate, and he was all about Trump until Trump lost the election. Now, we're not getting into all the if and buts about the election, but once it came out that it looked like Donald Trump was losing the election, literally on election night, Lindsey Graham, you can go back and look at the videos and tell me where I'm wrong, his acceptance speech was all about himself and basically bashing Trump. And then, of course, after January 6th stuff happened, Lindsey Graham literally said, when it comes to Trump, count me out. Those are his words, not mine. And then fast forward to when Trump won re-election and became Trump 47, Lindsey Graham since then has been all about Donald Trump. So, on for Trump, against Trump, for Trump, depends on which way the power pendulum was swinging. Because there were two things about Lindsey Graham you could count on. One, that he wanted American boots on the ground everywhere in the world. You could count on that. And the other is that he would put his finger to the wind, and whichever way the power was politically, that's the side he was on. And so I criticize the man too, but I don't want to put the man down in death, in a sense, not with the vitriol. But I will say this, actually, President Trump, you could say, was the same way. I would disagree with that, because President Trump has shown a great capacity to forgive people once you come back into the fold. He doesn't hold grudges. At least he gives you a chance to come back into the fold. And I do think Donald Trump genuinely had affection for Lindsey Graham down the stretch here, and I don't think that was fake and phony at all. President Trump, so let's talk about the impacts a little bit of losing Lindsey Graham. President Trump is definitely going to miss Lindsey Graham's presence in the U.S. Senate. There is no doubt about that. Lindsey Graham was trying to orchestrate the passage of the SAVE Act, which is basically, identification to vote, citizens only voting in federal elections, that type of thing. I don't think it was going to pass anyway, but Lindsey Graham was the last best chance, I think. And I could be wrong, as they say about this, but I think Lindsey Graham was going to try one more time through reconciliation, which he was basically the head of that, and he was going to try to usher that through. And I believe now that is going to be dead on arrival, and might have to, if it ever happens, we'll have to wait until next year or later. The other thing that Lindsey Graham, that Trump is going to miss about him, is Lindsey Graham was President Trump's go-to guy. I would call him the Senate whisperer, so to speak. It certainly wasn't Mitch McConnell, and we're going to talk about him more in just a minute. But Lindsey Graham had his pulse on the Senate very, very, very firmly, and President Trump relied on Lindsey Graham. He said it himself, to let him know what was actually happening in the Senate. It wasn't the president of the Senate, Thune. It was Lindsey Graham that essentially tapped into Donald Trump. And as I say, I think they had a conversation not long before Lindsey Graham had his health crisis. But Lindsey Graham came on the national scene, and I remember it really well. He served in the military. I think it was the Air Force. He was a JAG officer, an attorney. He didn't really practice law privately that I'm aware of, but he was a JAG, and so I give him credit for his service, no question about that. Anybody who's willing to serve in the military deserves some props there. But he got into the House fairly early in his career, and not too long after he was in there, I don't know if it was his first or second term, I'd have to go back and look at it, but he was early on, basically a rookie in the House when Clinton was impeached. When Bill Clinton was impeached over the whole Monica Lewinsky deal and everything else, Lindsey Graham was the de facto prosecutor of the impeachment process for the Republicans. And what I mean by that is to understand the impeachment process. Essentially, to be impeached means you're charged by the House of Representatives. It's actually tried in the Senate, and the House prosecutes the case before the Senate. That's how it's done. And Lindsey Graham was appointed by the Republican House members to be the lead prosecutor, if you will. That's not the official title, but that is in all practicality what he was. And of course, the impeachment was unsuccessful. By the way, I'm not a big fan of impeachment, period, especially of a president. Clinton, did he deserve it? Maybe, maybe not. I'm not a big fan of impeachment because you have elections. There's term limits for president, and you have elections. I think the people, and outside some egregious crime, treason, something like that, I really think the people have the opportunity to vote the person out. And I really am not a big fan of impeaching presidents unless I say it's high crimes and misdemeanors, treason. But President Clinton survived that impeachment. But Lindsey Graham, by all accounts, did a yeoman's job in prosecuting that. Then he, of course, took that and became senator in South Carolina, which had two senators that were there forever. Probably the longest, one of them, Strom Thurmond, was the longest serving senator ever. So Lindsey had to wait his turn, but he got into the Senate, and he probably had his biggest, finest moment during the hearings on Brett Kavanaugh. You may remember that Brett Kavanaugh, appointed by Donald Trump in his first term for the vacant seat on the Supreme Court, ran into a big dust-up from the left. The Democrats basically tried to impeach him, if you want to call it that, tried to put him in prison, essentially, for all kinds of accusations that proved to be pretty much totally wrong, and I think Brett Kavanaugh has served fairly well. I want to play a video in just a second here that I think is probably Lindsey Graham's finest moment, and this was in the hearing when it looked like Kavanaugh's appointment to the Supreme Court was pretty much dead, because the rumors were that even the Trump administration was thinking about throwing in the towel, pulling it back, and putting up somebody else because they just didn't think it was going to pass. But Lindsey Graham defended Brett Kavanaugh and hammered the Democrats for what they were trying to do. And I don't always agree with Lindsey Graham, but on this point, I agreed with him 100%. And to me, this was his finest moment in his political career. Check it out.
If you wanted an FBI investigation, you could have come to us. What you want to do is destroy this guy's life, hold this seat open, and hope you win in 2020. You've said that, not me. You've got nothing to apologize for. When you see Sotomayor and Kagan, tell them that Lindsey said hello, because I voted for them. I would never do to them what you've done to this guy. This is the most unethical sham since I've been in politics. And if you really wanted to know the truth, you sure as hell wouldn't have done what you've done to this guy.
To me, that was an amazing thing, and I think that he absolutely turned the hearing around. And probably the strongest point he made was that he said that he voted for Sotomayor and one of the, I think, Kagan, who are liberal Supreme Court justices. He said he supported them. He voted for them, not necessarily supported them, but voted them because, to the victor belongs the spoils, so to speak, and that they deserve their appointment and they deserve to have their day up there. And he said shame on them for attacking that man, talking about Brett Kavanaugh, and I think he was right. So what's next? What's going to happen next is that in South Carolina, the governor of South Carolina, which is a Republican, has to appoint somebody to fill out the remainder of Lindsey Graham's term, which Lindsey Graham just won a Republican primary. He was up for re-election and would have been a shoo-in, there's no doubt about that. But his term actually ends in January of next year, so the governor is going to have to appoint somebody fairly quickly. and there's all kind of speculation about who that might be. We're not going to get into that right now. We'll wait and see. But shortly thereafter that, they'll have to have a primary. The Republican Party in South Carolina will have to have a primary, and then they will choose someone to actually be on the list in November to run for that seat. I don't expect it to be that big of a deal, maybe who gets that appointment. You got to think that the lady that Trump just endorsed for governor there that did not make it, Evett, I think is her name, would probably be since she's got the Trump endorsement, if that holds true, will probably be the leading candidate to get that position. We'll have to wait and see. I don't think it's going to be the case that a Democrat is going to win that seat come November. I'm not even sure exactly who is running for that, but I think that Lindsey Graham's successor will be a Republican. Well, we're going to talk some more about the topsy-turvy stuff when we get back, but we're going to go ahead and take a quick commercial break here. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, make the call. Call Freddie, become a sponsor of the show, join our team to help educate, motivate, and activate people. And as my good friend Ted Yoho, the captain of our ship, who is off today, who's traveling and on assignment, would tell you about Archer Automotive, one of our great sponsors. I'll just say make the call to Archer Automotive. They're in the beautiful town of Archer, which is about 15 miles or so west of Gainesville. Check them out. You cannot beat the family-owned business of Archer Automotive. We'll be right back.
Hi there, this is Coach Steve Spurrier, and I want to let you know that by popular demand, Spurrier's Gridiron Grill's delicious brunch is now served in a premium buffet. You have spoken, we have listened, and we're now serving Gainesville's only elevated buffet, complete with an omelet station, ginger sage chicken sausage, shredded short rib, plus you can enjoy bottomless mimosas and Bloody Marys. So join us every Saturday and Sunday from 11 to 3 for the best brunch in town.
We're back to the 3 Ps, the Political Pirate Podcast with your host here, the old salty dog, John Martin. Of course, if you're just tuning in, I'll remind you that the captain of our pirate ship is doing well, Mr. Ted Yoho, but he's on assignment. He's traveling today, and when he returns, we'll get a full report. Of course, you just saw the old ball coach, the head ball coach, as we affectionately call him in these parts, Mr. Steve Spurrier, and I'm sitting in the heart of Spurrier's Gridiron Grill here with the Helmet Room Podcast. If you've never been here, you owe it to yourself to check it out. It's absolutely spectacular. Not only is it a fantastic place to eat, but it is literally a museum to not only Spurrier's legacy, but college football in general. Check it out, Celebration Point in Gainesville, Florida. When we went to break, we were talking about the untimely death of Mr. Lindsey Graham and how it's kind of throwing the Senate into somewhat topsy-turvy turmoil. Well, another situation, there's several, and we're going to talk about them right now, that are happening literally on the Republican side and the Democrat to that extent, that are going to put things a bit topsy-turvy. And the one that comes to mind also is Senator Mitch McConnell. Now, Mitch McConnell is retiring. Basically, he had to be drug out of there, but Mitch McConnell is retiring. But he has not been active in the Senate since early June because apparently he had a fall in his house and had to be hospitalized. There you see Mitch leaning on an aide. That picture was probably about 2 months ago. But apparently he is recuperating. He made a statement over the weekend that he's not quite ready to come back, but that he plans to come back, even though he is not running for re-election, and we'll get in that in just a moment. Now, I'm not a big fan of Mitch McConnell. I never have been. Wasn't that big a fan of Lindsey Graham? Never have been a Mitch McConnell. He represents to me everything that is wrong in D.C. I'll say that again. Mitch McConnell represents everything that is wrong to me in D.C. He literally is the flip side of the same coin as Chucky Schumer. They are peas in a pod. They represent what is wrong in D.C. You have these people that live there that were first mates on the ark, and they think they're entitled to those seats forever, and they really don't care who is in power. They don't care about presidents at all, because that presidents come and go, but people like Mitch McConnell and people like Chuck Schumer are there forever. Now, I will give McConnell credit for one thing. He did keep Merrick Garland, off the Supreme Court and opened up the way for the conservative majority we have here. So I will give him credit for that. But Mitch McConnell is retiring, but as I say, he said he's not ready to come back yet. So what happens? All right, there's a guy named Andy Barr who won the Republican primary. He's a representative in Congress in Kentucky. He won the primary. So regardless of what happens with Mitch McConnell, Mr. Barr will be on the ballot in November to replace Mitch McConnell. Now, the way Kentucky is, and I actually like this law. I wish all states would implement it. Certainly, I wish Florida would. That regardless of who the governor is, in Kentucky, state law says that the governor, who in this case is Andy Beshear, a Democrat, must appoint a Republican, because a Republican won that seat, in this case Mitch McConnell. If he has to leave early, Beshear has to replace him with a Republican. And I think that Andy Barr is ultimately going to win that seat he's way ahead in the polls and all that. Now, I don't know what Beshear is going to do. There's a gentleman named Charles Booker. I think we got a picture of him. He is a former state representative in Kentucky, and he's a member of Beshear's inner circle, his administration. His title is Office of Faith-Based Community Initiatives, whatever that is. Now, normally, if it were like a state of Florida and they had a Democrat governor with a Republican senator, Beshear, if he could, there's no question he would appoint this Booker fella right now, which would give him a leg up potentially in the general election. But he can't do that. So who's he going to appoint? I don't think he's going to appoint Andy Barr, because that would only elevate him and increase his already great chances of winning Mitch McConnell's seat. So it's going to be really interesting to see who Beshear puts up there. He's got to put a Republican, but is he going to put one up there that's going to try to somehow help the Democratic cause? I think that is the most interesting thing about it, and we'll just have to wait and see what Mr. Beshear does. Now, another race that is topsy-turvy, and we talked about this on our Friday show when Ted was with us, is the Plattner finally filed his paperwork. You know, I was questioning whether he actually would. He announced like Thursday evening that he was dropping out of the race. If you want to see our coverage of that, check out our show from Friday. But I was skeptical that he might not, because he had till I think today or maybe tomorrow at the latest to file for it. But he absolutely filed his paperwork over the weekend, and he is no longer going to be on the ballot. But he is definitely not going away. So it'll be interesting to see, what he did. Now, I posted this meme on Facebook. It is pretty funny to me. Plattner and Elizabeth Warren, man. It's like a love story. I still can't get over how Elizabeth Warren and the other Democrats, it's amazing. They are throwing Plattner under the bus like never before. But the main Democratic Party has until July 27th to pick Plattner's replacement. And apparently what they're going to do is they're going to have a primary, but it's not open to the general public. They've got already about 6 different people who I don't know how they qualify to run, but have announced that they're running for that seat. And it will be about 600, I think, appointed delegates, is the way I understand it, that will ultimately vote for that. So even though Plattner won like 73% of the vote in the Democratic primary, which is a huge percentage, he is not going to be on the ballot. So in a way, the Democrats are actually going an end run around the primary results, just like they did for the presidential election, and they're going to vote someone in. I guess they're not going to just appoint them, so they're doing it a little bit more democratic, but it's pretty interesting to see. Now, I want to play a video for you right now. This is Joy Reid, formerly of MS Now, who got fired from that. How bad do you have to be to get fired from MS Now? But she's got a podcast, and this is a snippet from one of her recent shows when she essentially addresses the Democratic Party in general, and especially the Democratic Party in Maine, and gives them a warning and tells them what they need to do. Check this out.
Progressives picked Plattner. So you need to replace him with somebody who is ideologically the same, because that is what was decided. The people of Maine, the Democratic voters of Maine said, we want a progressive. They did not say they want an APAC moderate. So the Democratic Party in Maine ought to pick someone who is ideologically the same or ideologically similar as Plattner. If you don't, and the DNC shoves an APAC candidate down your throat, you have my permission to not vote for them, because the Democratic Party needs to learn that it is not vote blue no matter who. It matters who. They sometimes need to lose in order to learn. Sometimes when you lose, you learn. And I'm just telling you right now, if they put a little APAC, send Israel all the bombs, give Saudi Arabia all the money, let the UAE run over us and give Trump another plane. If they put another APAC sellout moderate in place of Graham Plattner, and they do not put somebody in who is his same ideology, you have my permission to stay your ass home. Then they will learn when Susan Collins gets 6 more years. At this point, we have to teach Democrats. We need to instruct them and teach them how to treat us. It's like being in a relationship. You got to teach people how to treat your ass.
You know, the good thing about it is 6 more years, if she gets in, she might go the way of Mitch McConnell.
She'll be exactly.
Well, pardon my language, but to quote Miss Joy Reid, who has no joy in her life at all, it doesn't see, she tells them essentially that if the Democrats don't appoint someone who is hardcore to the left, progressive, basically a socialist, and I don't even know what Plattner actually was. I think he was a chameleon. He was whatever he needed to be. He was just looking for a job. But if you take Miss Reid at her word, she's saying that if the Democrats point some kind of mainstream establishment Democrat instead of a hardcore progressive leftist, then to quote I'm just going to quote her, she said that you have her permission to, if you're a Democrat, to stay your ASS at home, which would assure that Susan Collins is going to win that seat. In the event that the Senate races are going to be interesting, it's absolutely going to be interesting to see what happens, because, ladies and gentlemen, the progressive left has gone so far. It's communist now, right? They're communists coming forward. I was listening to a show on the way in here, MS Now. Of course, I do a morning schmo, Joe, I guess to be correct. And I was listening to this pundit on there talking about how the Democrats need to move to the left so far. They need to create a new constitution. Of course, they need to pack the court. They basically need to obliterate all government institutions and change everything. That's what's going to happen if you Republicans stay your butt at home. That's why Ted and I, the captain of our pirate ship, who is on assignment this week, that's why we're always telling you we need your help to educate, to motivate, to activate people. Because if you take Joy Reid's position and stay your hiney at home, all could be lost. There is no doubt about it. Now we're going to switch gears a little bit here and ask the question, is NATO still relevant? You know, Donald Trump went over this weekend to Turkey. If you didn't see his arrival there, I mean, it was grandiose to say the least. Erdogan gave him a hero's welcome to Turkey. President Trump challenged NATO quite a bit. He ended up meeting with Zelensky over there. He met with the leader of Syria now on a sidebar and all of that. And of course, President Trump chastised, for instance, Spain quite a bit. He is continuously pushing this idea that NATO needs to spend more on their own defense. And he also challenged them about the idea of them not helping with Iran, all of that. So you can agree or disagree with that, but that's what he did. Now, Fareed Zakaria, I actually like Fareed Zakaria. I don't always agree with him, but I think he's an honest broker in the sense that he comes to the topic of basically world geopolitics from his perspective in an honest way. He's consistent. With me, as long as you're coming from an honest perspective, that you're just not putting your finger to the wind and pushing one thing because your ideological politics or you're just adamantly opposed, because he's given Donald Trump some credit in the past as well. So I actually respect Fareed Zakaria. I tape his show and watch it pretty regular. I don't talk about him too much on our show, but I have from time to time. But he has an opinion piece in the New York Times, I think it is, and it's basically the script from his weekend show. When he asked the question about NATO moving forward and NATO not necessarily needing the United States of America. And it's a pretty interesting perspective that I think is worthy of discussing. This is what some of Mr. Zakaria's points. He says Donald Trump pressured NATO allies to increase defense spending, and they did. He did in his first term and now in his second term, 45 and now 47. And Zakaria is spot on. He gives Donald Trump credit for that and essentially says that NATO needed to do that Donald Trump was spot on with this and that he needed to do that. His criticism actually is that Donald Trump's attack on NATO, principally starting with around the supposed taking of Greenland and all that, is fractured NATO to the point that they may act without us. Of course, they did act without us in a sense of closing their bases down. So he makes a point. Let's get on with that. Zakaria makes this point. He says the long-term consequences may weaken America's strategic position rather than strengthen it. It's an interesting take because what he's saying is that, that the United States has clearly been the hub, if you will, of the wheel of NATO. They've been the driving force from NATO. They've been basically the captain of the ship of NATO since after World War II when NATO was founded. He is absolutely correct about that. We have driven that ship of NATO, good, bad, or whatever. It's just a fact. We have bankrolled it quite a bit. He's not necessarily, Mr. Zakaria, not saying the United States shouldn't ask them to spend more money. Like I said earlier, he's actually applauded that. But he does think that that if NATO increases their spending and the United States continues to pull back from it, I'm not sure that's exactly what Trump is doing, but that's what Zakaria is trying to say, that NATO will then try to go it alone, and that might be true. And he says that will actually weaken the United States' position in the world. It's an interesting take. I don't necessarily agree with it, but let's dig a little deeper. But Zakario says, but higher European spending does not reduce U.S. spending. And he's right about that, because he makes a point. He says Trump has proposed a massive, Zakario's words, massive 1.5 trillion U.S. defense budget in 2027. That is correct. It was going to be 1 trillion and just recently upped it to 1.5 trillion. And Zakario's point is, he says, showing that America's global commitments, not NATO burden sharing, drives its military cost. And he's right about that. It's not just the fact that NATO has not spent their fair share, that the United States has been spending money around the world. We have been, love it, hate it. Lindsey Graham was a big advocate for this, the late Lindsey Graham, that we're literally become the policemen of the world. Since World War II, I don't think there's any argument really to be had that the United States hasn't become the de facto policeman of the world. Now, whether we should be is debatable, without a doubt. I don't think we should be, but it's kind of tricky, because I do think we have to be engaged at some level. We cannot be, when our founding documents were written, we were literally an island to ourselves and we were protected by oceans. We know that that is not the same today with modern warfare and everything else, the capability. We cannot be an island to ourselves. Now, does that mean we need to be policemen of the world? No. There's a balance in there somewhere, and I don't think we've quite found it just yet. Many people, including myself, thought that Donald Trump was on the right track about that. Now, he was one of the first presidents since Eisenhower to question the military-industrial complex, and I think that was dangerous on his part, and one of the reasons why a lot of big corporations came out against him was that. But Donald Trump has not totally lived up to the promise of that, because the war that we're having in Iran is proof in the pudding of that. So we are still doing some policeman aspects of the world. Not to the extent that Lindsey Graham would have us, but probably more than what a lot of us who supported Donald Trump wanted. Zakaria goes on to say, as Europe becomes more capable militarily, this is the part that's kind of tricky for me. It said it becomes less dependent on the U.S. This reduces America's influence within NATO and globally. Now, if true, what does that mean? So what Zakario is saying is that one of the things that having us as the driving force in NATO has done is had us been able to project our military might a lot easier around the world, because we had bases all over Europe, which is not just protective of Europe, but obviously the Middle East is a close jump to, other places like that. And he's got a point there, but I would say a couple of things about that. One of Donald Trump's current criticisms of NATO is that they weren't letting us use those bases in Epic Fury, our war with Iran. And they weren't helping us in the naval blockade and protecting the Straits of Hormuz, which is more critical, much more critical for Europe and the rest of the world than it is for us, other than the global price of oil and everything else. So, Zakario makes some points there, but I'm not sure on a couple of things here. One, that Europe is truly moving in the direction to pay for their own defense and expand their influence around the globe. I don't know that that's true. Germany clearly, and Zakario makes this point, is dramatically increasing what they're doing. Spain, for instance, who has been helping Iran, by the way, clandestinely, has not raised what they're spending. So it's kind of a mixed bag. But Zakario says here, the U.S. dominance in NATO has long given Washington strategic advantages, including access to European bases for operations in the Middle East, Africa, and Asia. There is no doubt about that. We have benefited greatly from that. But I also think that the changing nature of warfare, which we're seeing Iran doing, we're clearly seeing the Ukraine doing it with drones and everything else, is changing the whole dynamic of it. I don't know that in the not too distant future, we're going to need these bases the same as we did before, because aircraft carriers are bases themselves. Drone warfare changes everything. And of course, Space Force, which is real, which is a real deal, weapons in space and all of that, which I'm not advocating for. I'm just saying it is going to happen. The nature of war is drastically changing. So I don't know that we're going to need the bases everywhere like we have before. But this is another point that Zakaria makes, and I think it's an interesting one. He says, growing distrust of U.S. reliability could make European governments less willing to support American actions. Well, they clearly are already like that. And I think it's not just distrust. This is where I probably deviate, because I'm not sure it's a distrust of America, because they'll take our money anytime. I think as the political changing of countries, I mean, I put up a meme the other day on our show, on our Facebook sites, that got a lot of publicity, quite a few likes and shares. And that was that with the elimination of, I think, Morocco at the time in the World Cup, that the only two Muslim nations left playing was England and France. Of course, we know it's just England and Argentina right now, which I'm pulling for Argentina, by the way. But I made that point that they were the only two Muslim nations left was England and France. And see, that's something that I say in jest, but it's true. The politics of England, the politics of France, the politics of Europe, we're seeing it in Ireland. We're clearly seeing it in Spain. The Islamification of those countries is changing their politics. And yes, there it is right there. Thank you, Mr. Producer. Not only is the Islamification of Europe happening, but we're focused right now on Iran. We're worried about them obtaining nuclear weapons. But I've mentioned this on the show before, but of course, if I say it, it bears repeating. You know, two countries that have nuclear weapons now, England and France, are in danger of being taken over by Islamic fundamentalists without firing a shot politically. And that means they'll have nuclear weapons. There are like 50 mayors, including the mayor of London, that are totally Islamic fundamentalists right now. So to me, that's a bigger threat to Europe than anything that Donald Trump is doing. But Zakaria, he says here, European countries may reduce purchases of U.S. weapons, fearing future political interference from Washington. So he's basically saying that they're going to move away from purchasing weapons from the United States of America because they're afraid that, we might withhold parts and stuff like that. Zakaria says this would weaken defense industrial ties that have historically reinforced strategic alignment. I think it's a valid point, but there's one big hole in his theory there. If they're not going to buy them from us, who are they going to buy them from? They're clearly not going to manufacture them themselves, not right now. That would take way too much to do. They're not going to buy them from Russia, right? Because one of the reasons they're supposedly ramping up is to counteract the Russia threat, so that it wouldn't make no sense to buy them from them. Are they going to turn around and buy them from China? I guess that's possible, but that has all kind of pitfalls in and of itself, because then you're reliable on China. If I had a choice between having to depend on a country, I think would pick United States over China. So, he's got a point, but I think it's a bit on shaky ground. But he talks about Germany, and I mentioned it a minute ago, rapidly expanding defense budget could create new intra-European tensions, because he makes the case that all these wars that have happened in Europe over the last couple of 100 years, been some terrible ones, including 2 world wars, started in Europe was because Europe had to always kind of balance each other. The French had to counteract the English, who had to counteract the Germans, and vice versa. So he's worried about that happening again. I think that is an absolutely legitimate fear that could happen, but I'm not seeing that right now. The article concludes that America may eventually regret pushing Europe to rearm because the old NATO dependent on U.S. leadership served American interests exceptionally well. He's correct about that. There's no doubt that's a strong argument. It has served America well. But my question is, so what is the alternative to that? Because if we get pushed off to the side, I don't think we're going to lessen our strength militarily. So I don't see Europe being able to strengthen themselves militarily in any significant way without our help. So I think we're still in the driver's seat. Could it go that way? Who knows? But I really think at the end of the day that warfare, and I'm not advocating for warfare, but warfare is going to dramatically change. It already is. It shows that in the Ukraine war, how they're able to hold off Russia. It shows how Iran, even though we're going to talk a little bit about that in the closing couple of minutes here, but if you get, I got to give Iran credit for this. They're still able to project power in the Strait of Hormuz and all of that because of the changing nature of warfare with missiles, drone defense, all of that kind of stuff. It definitely is something to look at. Iran. Let's talk a couple of minutes while we have in the show about Iran. Iran continues to be a problem. We've been exchanging. The ceasefire's dead. It's over. The agreement's over. Trump even came out yesterday and said, we had a great talk. We came to some more agreements. And then 20 minutes after we got through talking, they fired on a Cyprus flagged ship in the Strait of Hormuz. It is total chaos over there. I still believe the only way we resolve the situation in Iran is to make the Strait of Hormuz irrelevant. That's going to take some time. In the meantime, I advocate for whack-a-mole, where we basically need to go ahead and take out all these civilian targets. And when I say civilian targets, I mean the bridges, the roads, those kind of things. We need to degrade their capability as much as possible, and we just need to put drones and satellites over them, and if they stick their head up, bam, they're gone. I mean, I don't think we can negotiate with these people anymore, and we got to hope that if there is regime change, it comes from within. One more quick point I want to make before we close out the show, and that is we talked about the Senate elections at the beginning. Check out the beginning of our show. Remember that we're now on live Mondays and Fridays at noon. You can still watch our show on demand whenever you want, but the clock is ticking, ladies and gentlemen. Primaries. Florida's primary, for instance, a lot of states have already had those, but Florida's primary statewide is August 18th of 2026. The general election follows on Tuesday, November 3rd, 2026. So I know everybody's on like summer break and all of that kind of stuff, but it's time to get serious about the political future of your state, your county, your city, that kind of thing. Obviously, the nation. We got to get focused because that clock is ticking. Primaries are about to happen everywhere if they haven't already, and there is a lot at stake, ladies and gentlemen. So I would just say, wake up, America, because the clock is ticking. Help us here to educate, motivate, and activate people. And the opposite of what Miss Joy Reid says, don't stay your behind at home. Get out, get motivated, get educated, and activate yourself and others. That's going to do it for our show today. I hope you've enjoyed the show as much as I've enjoyed bringing it to you. Please like what we're doing, share what we're doing far and wide. We really appreciate you. Of course, our captain will be back probably not until Monday. We'll see if we get him back on Friday. Our new time is 12 noon every day. Remember to call Freddie. Help us with our mission. Remember our sponsors, Jeffrey Meldon Attorneys are a sponsor, Archer Automotive, the great people out there are sponsors. Have a blessed day, ladies and gentlemen, and we will see you again on Friday, Lord willing.